Max came home early, expecting a quiet night with his wife, but what he found in the driveway, a mysterious gold Mercedes, was the first crack in a perfect life that was about to shatter. Little did he know, that car would drive him into a journey of betrayal, heartbreak, and an unexpected path to redemption. Max found himself in a seat at the bustling New York airport, not exactly the ideal setting for an evening. He sighed, glancing toward the gate, where passengers were boarding what he hoped would be his flight back to Charlotte. Life had been a whirlwind lately. Max, along with his two sisters, co-owned a modest pharmaceutical company, a legacy from their father. Decades ago, his father had developed a range of niche but valuable drugs that kept the business lucrative, though never quite ripe for significant expansion. Now, with both parents gone, Max had spent the past few days in New York negotiating the sale of the company to a major pharmaceutical firm. The deal had been finalized earlier that day, leaving the lawyers to handle the remaining paperwork. For Max, the negotiations meant the end of an era and the beginning of a new chapter. He wanted to head home tonight, but prospects weren't looking good. The final flight to Charlotte was overbooked, and he was third on the standby list. Unsure of what to tell his wife, Camila, he opted not to call her yet. Instead, he settled at the airport bar, keeping one eye on the gate while nursing his second gin and tonic. Thoughts of the deal swirled in his mind, the $10 million he'd soon receive as his share, plus a lucrative transition period with the larger pharmaceutical giant. That windfall promised a significant shift for him and Camila. With their twin daughters attending Duke, both juniors, and their tuition bills stretching their finances thin, this sale would alleviate the pressure. For the first time in years, Max envisioned a comfortable future. The boarding process began to wind down, and Max watched as agents called the final passengers to board. He felt the familiar pang of disappointment. It looked like he wasn't going to make it. Then, just as the last few passengers disappeared through the gate, something unexpected happened. The digital screen above the counter updated, and there it was, his name, highlighted on the standby list. Max couldn't believe his luck. Tossing a few bills onto the bar, he waved to the bartender, who acknowledged him with a thumbs up. Grabbing his briefcase and duffel bag, Max hurried to the gate. An agent handed him a boarding pass, quickly explaining that a group of 4 who had checked in remotely failed to show up, freeing up seats. As he stepped onto the plane, relief washed over him. To his surprise, his ticket was for a first-class seat. A small smile crept across his face as he thought, maybe my luck is finally turning. Max leaned back in his first-class seat, marveling at the stroke of luck that brought him home a day early. Perhaps it was a sign that the pharmaceutical deal, which had occupied so much of his energy, was destined to conclude smoothly. As the plane taxied to the runway, a flight attendant asked if he wanted a drink. Feeling like he'd earned it, Max ordered another gin and tonic, savoring the moment before drifting into a comfortable sleep. His dreams were filled with visions of a bright future, one where he and Camila could always afford the luxury of first-class travel, free from financial worries. The jolt of the landing woke him abruptly. Groggy but relieved to be home, Max shuffled off the plane and made his way to the taxi stand. His pickup truck was still parked at the airport, but he was too drained, and perhaps a bit too tipsy, to drive. It was late, far too late to wake Camila for a ride, so he flagged a cab for the trip to their house a few miles outside of Charlotte. The cab ride lulled him into another brief doze. He was jarred awake as the driver pulled up to his home, the man's voice cutting through Max's grogginess. Fumbling for his wallet, Max paid the fare, added a generous tip, and stepped out of the taxi, feeling the weight of the long day in his legs. As the cab pulled away, Max turned toward the house, ready to collapse into the comfort of his bed, and into Camila's arms. But something unusual stopped him cold. A sleek gold Mercedes sat parked in the driveway, directly in front of his side of the garage. He didn't recognize the car, but its polished, fashionable design caught his eye. He stood frozen, staring at the vehicle and the darkened house behind it, his fatigue giving way to a creeping unease. Max tried to shake off the strange feeling. Maybe Camila had a visitor, he thought. But the house was eerily quiet, with no signs of activity. For what felt like an eternity, he stood there, his thoughts spiraling. Eventually, he took a hesitant step forward and peered through the windows, hoping for some innocent explanation. His heart sank like a stone. There, in the faint light from the street lamp outside, he saw Camila in their bed, but she wasn't alone. Her hand lay draped across a man, and both were sound asleep, their quiet snores filling the room. For years, Max had found Camila's soft snoring comforting, a sign of her feeling safe and at peace beside him. But now, the same sound twisted the knife in his chest, a cruel reminder of how completely his world had changed in the span of a single evening. He stood there, unable to move, his mind struggling to process the scene before him. The exhaustion from his long day and the warmth of his earlier drinks were gone, replaced by a raw, cutting clarity. The future he had dreamed of, the one he had spent years building, shattered before his eyes. Max stood in the quiet room, still as a statue, listening to the faint rhythm of Camila's snoring. It was a sound that had always comforted him, a gentle assurance of their shared life. How many nights had he fallen asleep to that soft purring, feeling like the luckiest man alive? But now, it felt like a cruel mockery. He tightened his grip on the shoes and clothes he had silently gathered from the floor. With one last glance at his wife, his beloved partner of more than 20 years, the mother of his daughters, he steeled his heart against the love that had once been his guiding light. He didn't allow himself to cry, there would be time for tears later. For now, he turned and left the room, each step feeling heavier than the last. Downstairs, the night air greeted him as he stepped outside. The world was eerily quiet, save for the occasional chirp of crickets. He spotted the gold Mercedes in the driveway and paused for a moment, considering his next move. The key fob on the hood of the car caught his attention. He pressed it, and the soft beep confirmed the doors were unlocked. Max slid into the driver's seat, setting his briefcase and duffel bag on the passenger side. He wasn't one for fancy cars and had always found the ostentatious gleam of vehicles like this unnecessary. Yet, as he gripped the smooth steering wheel, he felt a cold determination settle over him. He started the car, the engine purring to life like the sound he had cherished so much. Without a backward glance at the house or the life he had just left behind, Max drove into the night. Upstairs, Camila stirred awake as Franklin moved beside her. "What's wrong?" she asked groggily, noticing his agitation. Franklin sat up, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "My clothes are gone. And my car, it's missing. Someone must have been here last night and taken them." Camila frowned, trying to process his words. They had been in the house all night. Who could have gotten in without them noticing? Then, like a thunderclap, the realization struck her, knocking the air from her lungs. She sank onto the bed, her hands trembling. "Camila, are you okay?" Franklin asked, his voice tinged with confusion. She looked at him, her face pale. "What if it was Max?" she whispered, barely able to form the words. Franklin's brows furrowed. Max? How would he? But the truth dawned on him as he watched her expression. The pieces clicked into place, and a heavy silence fell between them. Camila buried her face in her hands. Her mind raced, replaying every decision, every mistake that had led to this moment. She had known this affair couldn't last, had even resolved to end it today. Franklin was becoming too demanding, and the guilt was eating away at her. She had planned to gently break things off, to commit fully to the life she had built with Max. Yet, here she was, caught in the worst way imaginable. Her heart sank deeper as she imagined Max walking into their room, seeing the betrayal with his own eyes. She could only guess what he was thinking, or what he might do next. As the morning sun rose, Camila found herself pacing the bedroom, Franklin's words about his missing car and clothes still ringing in her ears. She couldn't shake the sinking feeling in her chest, her mind spinning with possibilities. Her thoughts alternated between rationalizing what had happened and dreading the inevitable confrontation with Max. Meanwhile, Franklin lounged in bed, indifferent to the gravity of the situation, more concerned about his next excuse for work and his appearance. "Maybe I should just call in sick," Franklin said, his voice casual as he fiddled with his phone. "We can hang out here for a while, see where the day takes us. Maybe we'll even need another shower." He gave Camila a playful smirk, but her response was muted. "Do whatever you need to," she replied distractedly, heading to the hallway to make a call of her own. Her job as a paralegal required her to keep up appearances, and she had no intention of letting her personal life spill into her professional one. Dialing her office, she informed them she wouldn't be coming in, citing an unexpected personal matter. Returning to the bedroom, she found Franklin sprawled on the bed, now clad in a makeshift outfit pieced together from her late father's old clothes. The sight made her pause. His shirt, washed hastily and still faintly pink from a previous mishap in the laundry, hung awkwardly, its sleeves trimmed unevenly to fit his frame. He looked like a disheveled clown, but instead of laughing or chiding him, Camila offered a faint smile. Her mind was elsewhere, on Max. Around the same time, Max was pulling into the driveway of the address listed on Franklin's driver's license. The gold Mercedes had proven helpful, a sleek yet ironic chariot for the errand he hadn't planned. He parked with deliberate precision, the engine purring to a halt as he took a moment to compose himself. His emotions were a tempest, hurt, betrayal, and anger swirling in equal measure, but he was determined to remain composed. The house was modest, not unlike his own, though it bore no trace of the life he had built with Camila. This was Franklin's domain, and Max felt a cold satisfaction at the thought of confronting the man who had so casually invaded his life. He stepped out of the car, duffel bag in hand, and approached the door. A woman answered, her face a mixture of curiosity and confusion. Max's presence, still dressed in yesterday's travel attire, didn't quite match the neighborhood's usual early morning visitors. "Can I help you?" she asked cautiously. Max held her gaze, his voice calm but laced with steel. "I need to speak to Franklin. It's about something important." The woman hesitated. "He's not here right now." "What's this about?" Max took a deep breath, his hand tightening slightly on the strap of his duffel bag. "Ma'am, if you don't tell me where he is, I'll have to show you something," he said, reaching for his phone. "I have a photo of your husband and my wife in bed. Naked. Asleep. Last night." Her expression shifted instantly, her color draining as she realized the weight of his words. Max held back the storm inside him, his composure a fragile shield against the raw emotions threatening to break through. "Now," he said firmly, "where is Franklin?" Max took a deep breath, leaning back against the doorframe. "I don't think there's anything wrong with your husband, or with my wife, for that matter. But if you want to call 911, go ahead. I'll wait in the car." For a moment, the woman, who had introduced herself as Molly, looked torn. Her face shifted from suspicion to resignation as the tension in her shoulders slackened. Finally, her expression fell, and she opened the door. "Come in," she said softly. Just as Molly started to speak, a small voice called from the kitchen, "Mommy." She glanced apologetically at Max and said, "Wait here, I'll be right back." She disappeared down the hallway, leaving Max standing in the quiet entryway. Moments later, she returned, her composure slightly rattled but her determination intact. She folded her arms and said, "All right, let's hear it. What exactly are you here to tell me?" Max didn't mince words. "I came here because of Franklin Thompson," he said evenly. "He's involved with the woman I'm married to." For a second, Molly's lips tightened, her face blank as she processed the statement. But then, to Max's surprise, she burst into laughter. It was sharp and bitter, but genuine nonetheless. Max found himself chuckling too, the absurdity of the situation breaking through his own emotional storm. "You're absolutely right about all the current events," Max said, still smiling faintly. My name's Max Tronder. My wife is Camilla Tronder, or at least she was until I found them together last night. As Max recounted the events, Molly's amusement faded, replaced by tears that she didn't bother to wipe away. I'm divorcing her, Max said with finality, and those photos I took will help me get a fair settlement, I'm sure. Molly sniffled and nodded. I can't say I blame you, she said. Then, with a small smile breaking through the sadness, she added, but as for that Mercedes you're driving? It's actually registered in my name. Some tax thing Franklin cooked up, he said it would be better for depreciation since I drive it more. Max raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Molly paused thoughtfully, then continued, since I technically own the car, I can give you permission to keep using it, at least until Franklin and I sort this mess out. Max laughed again, genuinely this time. Well, thank you for that. It's a nice ride, though I think I prefer one in a different color. Molly handed him a handwritten note of permission and joked, just don't scratch it. And don't tell Franklin I said that. As Max drove off in the gleaming gold Mercedes, he couldn't help but marvel at the strange twists life had taken. The car was a temporary escape, but it represented something bigger, a clean break and the possibility of a new beginning. For the first time in what felt like ages, he thought about what kind of future he might build once the dust settled, perhaps even one where he bought his own Mercedes. This time, in a color he actually liked. By noon, Camilla and Franklin pulled into the driveway of Franklin's home. The tension between them was palpable, and Camilla barely waited for the car to come to a full stop before ushering him out. Her hurried departure felt less like a goodbye and more like an escape. Franklin watched her speed off, then turned to face his house. Approaching the front door, Franklin silently hoped it might be unlocked. Molly, his wife, should still be home, or so he thought. He jiggled the handle, but it was firmly locked. Taking a few deep breaths, Franklin made up his mind to let himself in another way. Grabbing a branch from the yard, he hurled it through the family room window, the glass shattering with a sharp crack. Unfortunately for Franklin, the sound was immediately followed by the piercing wail of the home alarm system. Worse still, a police car happened to be cruising down his street at that exact moment. Unbeknownst to Franklin, Molly had called the police earlier in the day, citing concerns about recent break-ins in the area. Within moments, the officers were on the scene. Franklin muttered under his breath as the officers approached. One officer, clipboard in hand, looked him up and down. Sir, is this your residence? He asked firmly. Yes. Yes, it's my house. Franklin blurted, already feeling the heat of the situation. Then why didn't you just use a key? The officer pressed, his tone skeptical. And what's this about your car being reported stolen? Franklin stammered, trying to keep his story straight. Well, last night I was staying at a friend's house. This morning, the car, well, it wasn't there. It just disappeared. The officer raised an eyebrow. Disappeared, huh? Did you file a report? Maybe you left it at a bar somewhere. Franklin's mind raced. He couldn't tell the truth about where he'd been without incriminating himself further. And now, with the officers eyeing him and the handcuffs digging into his wrists, he realized he was running out of options. Meanwhile, across town, Camilla was trying to focus on anything but Franklin or the previous night's events. Yet, her mind kept circling back to Max. She still hadn't heard from him, and her unease was growing. She picked up her phone and tried calling his cell again, but it went straight to voicemail. Frustrated, she dialed his office. Sheila. It's Camilla again, she said, her voice strained. I'm starting to get worried about Max. I haven't heard from him at all, and it's really unlike him. Sheila, Max's secretary, sounded sympathetic but offered little reassurance. I haven't heard from him either, she admitted. Last I knew, he was still in New York with the lawyers. I can try calling around to see if anyone has an update. Would you? Camila asked, her voice cracking slightly. It's not like him to go silent. Max, on the other hand, had just arrived at a local office in his hometown, waiting for a meeting with his attorney. He had his own matters to sort out and hadn't yet decided how, or if, he would address Camila. Sitting in the quiet waiting room, his thoughts churned over the events of the last 24 hours. His musings were interrupted when the door opened, and a woman entered. She was around 50, her bright red hair an obvious dye job, and her demeanor brisk and no-nonsense. "Mr. Tronder," she called out, scanning the room. Max stood and gave her a small nod. "That's me." The woman's smile was tight but polite. "Follow me," she said, gesturing for him to enter her office. Whatever came next, Max knew his life would never look the same again. Anna Reinhardt welcomed Max with a warm handshake and a brisk tone that exuded professionalism. "I'm Anna Reinhardt," she said, leading him down the hall. "Fred called and told me to take the best possible care of you. Let's go into my office and discuss your situation." Max followed her into a well-appointed office, comfortable and professional without being overly extravagant. After thanking the secretary for a cup of coffee, he took a seat and began recounting the whirlwind events of the last day. His wife's betrayal. His decision to divorce. His desire to protect himself financially, particularly when it came to alimony and assets. Anna listened intently, her expression steady. When Max finished, she nodded thoughtfully. "First off, I know this isn't easy, but the short-term pain of handling things now can save you from worse outcomes later, like sharing your retirement money decades down the line." Max appreciated her candor and replied, "I understand. And yes, our kids are in college now, so there's no issue of child support. I'll take responsibility for the rest of their college expenses." "That simplifies things," Anna said. "Now, about the house. You and your wife will need to decide what you want. You can sell it and split the proceeds, or one of you can buy the other's share based on a current appraisal." Max nodded, his thoughts drifting for a moment. As Anna outlined next steps, his mind wandered briefly to the gold Mercedes and the surreal events of the night before. The reminder brought him back to reality, and he suddenly recalled promising his secretary that he'd return Camila's call. At her desk in the law firm where she worked, Camila picked up the phone, her heart pounding when she saw Max's name on the screen. "Camila," she said, trying to sound composed. "Camila, this is Max," his voice came through, calm but with an unmistakable edge. "You called and left a message for me." Relief and tension collided in her chest. "Oh, Max. Thank you for calling. I missed you. Where are you?" "I'm here in Charlotte," he replied coolly. "Got back last night." Camila's breath hitched. Her stomach churned as dread unfurled inside her. "Last night?" she asked, her voice thin. The snake of guilt that had coiled deep in her belly now raised its head, hissing with fear. "Yes, Camila. Last night," Max said, his tone heavy with meaning. Camila's thoughts spiraled. She tried to focus on Max's words, but her mind drifted to darker places. Memories she'd buried long ago bubbled to the surface. Her early years had been filled with risky choices, her first real sexual experiences in college, shaped by a toxic need to feel powerless with men she thought were strong enough to dominate her. Football players. Reckless encounters. That part of her life had left scars, but she thought she'd left it behind when she met Max. Max had been everything she needed, stable, confident, tender yet strong in all the right ways. For years, she had believed he was enough to quiet that part of her. But now, faced with the consequences of her choices, she couldn't help but wonder how she'd let herself lose him. "Camila," Max said, pulling her back to the moment. His voice was calm but unyielding. "We need to talk. And I mean really talk." She swallowed hard, her voice shaky. "Yes, Max. I know. Camila had always known that Max was a great man, an exceptional father to their daughters and a solid provider. For years, she had convinced herself that his love and stability were enough. And for a time, they were. When the girls were younger, Camila felt fulfilled in their family life, and even after the plane ride back to Charlotte years ago, when guilt over her infidelity first surfaced, she had resolved to change. She broke off her affair, vowing to remain faithful to Max. By the time their daughters left for college, Camila believed she had conquered her demons. She loved Max deeply and relished their newfound time together, free of the constant demands of parenting. But no matter how much she tried to ignore it, the metaphorical snake of temptation never truly left her. It waited in the shadows, stirring whenever Max did something unexpectedly kind, like the time he insisted she get a luxury car of her choosing, saying she deserved the best. Camila couldn't understand why acts of love sometimes unsettled her. Instead of simply appreciating Max's devotion, she would feel that unwelcome, slithering sensation, the nagging bite of inadequacy or guilt. And now, sitting across from him as he confronted her with the truth, she felt the full weight of the choices she had made. "Camila," Max said, his voice steady but cold. "We need to talk, really talk. I have questions, and I expect answers." Camila's voice trembled as she tried to respond. "Max, please, if we have any chance of saving this, asking questions and giving answers will only destroy it. Let's leave. Run away for a few days, go to an island, somewhere we can reconnect. Please, Max." But Max's expression hardened. "Camila, you're delusional if you think we can avoid this. If you can't answer my questions, I'll leave right now." The snake coiled tighter in her stomach, each word of his cutting deep. She nodded reluctantly, bracing herself for the storm. "I think you already know, Camila," Max said, his voice heavy with emotion. "Our marriage is over. I can see it in your eyes." He exhaled sharply, his shoulders sagging. "You deserve someone better suited to you, and I deserve honesty. I don't think we can find that together anymore." Camila's tears finally spilled as she pleaded, "Max, I'll do anything. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Just give me one more chance." But Max shook his head. "It's too late. Call the lawyer, Camila. Tomorrow, you'll be served with divorce papers." With that, Max rose from his seat and left the room. Camila sat there in stunned silence, the weight of his words pressing down on her. At first, she couldn't even cry. Instead, her mind replayed everything he'd said, the snake in her stomach biting harder as the realization of her shattered marriage sank in. Later that evening, Max picked up his phone to make another call. He needed to tie up one more loose end, the gold Mercedes. Dialing Molly's number, he leaned back and waited as the line connected. "Molly? It's Max Tronder from this morning," he said when she answered. "I just wanted to check in, see how you're doing and figure out what you want me to do with the car." Molly's voice was warm but weary. "Max, thank you for calling. I've been thinking about everything today." There was a pause before she continued. "Keep the car for now. I need to sort out a few things, but honestly, I think you deserve to drive it around for a while. It feels like you've earned it." Max smiled faintly, appreciating her kindness in the midst of both their turmoil. "Thanks, Molly. I'll take good care of it." After hanging up with Molly, Max sat in silence, reflecting on the day's events. Molly's matter-of-fact tone and her determination to take control of her life had left him with mixed feelings. He admired her resilience and clear boundaries with Franklin but felt a tinge of jealousy at her ability to assert herself so decisively. He couldn't help but compare it to his own situation, where the emotions of betrayal and heartbreak still weighed heavily. As he mused, his phone buzzed again. It was Janie, one of his twin daughters. "Daddy, hey," she said brightly, her voice a small comfort amidst the turmoil. "Hey, sweetheart," Max replied, his tone softening. "You guessed correctly, It's me. What's the matter? Nothing bad, Janie said. Just wanted to check in. You sounded. I don't know, a little off last time we talked. Max smiled faintly. Thanks for checking in, Janie. Actually, I was thinking, tomorrow is Saturday. How about we do brunch? You and your sister, me. The bistro on 4th Street. Say around 11. That sounds great, Dad. Janie said. There was a rustling sound on her end, and then she added, wait a second. After a brief pause, she came back. Joan's in. She says she's excited. Meanwhile, Camila sat alone in what was still, for now, her house. She had returned from dinner, her emotions in turmoil after a scene at the restaurant that had left her tear-streaked and raw. The waitress had asked if she needed to use the restroom, but Camila had waved her off, paid her bill, and left. Now, back home, she reached for a bottle of gin. It wasn't enough to drown her sorrows completely but just enough to blur the edges of her pain. As she sipped, her thoughts drifted to Max and the wreckage of their relationship. She wanted him back, but she couldn't figure out how to undo what had been done. The next day, Max met Janie and Joan at the bistro, a familiar brunch spot full of nostalgia for all three. Over coffee and pancakes, the conversation turned serious. Joan hesitated for a moment, then spoke. Dad, what's happening with Mom? Is it true? Max sighed heavily, his heart breaking for his daughters. Listen to me, girls, he said gently. Yes, your mom cheated on me. But that doesn't mean she cheated on you. She loves you both so much. Joan's eyes filled with tears, and she said through sobs, if her cheating is tearing apart our family, then it's like she cheated on us too. Max's composure cracked, and for the first time, tears rolled down his face. His daughters moved to hug him, all three holding each other in a bittersweet moment of solidarity. When the tears subsided, Max leaned back and looked at his girls seriously. I know this is hard. It's hard for me too. But I need you both to focus on your schoolwork, no matter how tough it feels. I've set aside enough money for your senior year at Duke, and if either of you want to pursue graduate school, I'll make it happen. They both nodded, appreciating his commitment despite the chaos. But, Max added, there's one condition. Janie and Joan exchanged a glance. What is it? Joan asked hesitantly. I expect you to work hard and maintain good grades, Max said. What your mom did is painful, but you're adults now. Life throws curveballs, but I want you to stay on course. Both girls nodded solemnly, their respect for their father deepening as they saw the strength he was drawing upon to keep their family steady in the storm. Max held his daughters tightly before saying goodbye, leaving them with reassurances that he would always be there for them. I promise you both this, I'm here to help you get a strong start in your adult lives. You'll always have my support, no matter what, he said, his voice steady despite the emotions swirling beneath. 2 home runs out of 3 in terms of the women in my life. That's not bad at all. As Max drove back to Charlotte in the gold Mercedes, his mind churned with thoughts. He could have let himself wallow in misery, drowning in regret and self-pity. But that wasn't who he was. Instead, he resolved to make the best of the mess life had handed him. Trust me, he muttered to himself as the road stretched ahead. I'll be fine. Back at home, the girls decided it was time to call their mother. Joan put the phone on speaker as it rang. The voice on the other end was hoarse and hesitant. Hello. Camila answered, sounding as though she hadn't slept. Mom, this is Joan and Jane, Joan said firmly. We just had breakfast with Dad, and he told us some terrible news. Camila's voice cracked as she replied, barely above a whisper. I know, she said. I know I screwed up. I ruined my marriage. Your father hates me, and he's right to. I've done disgusting things. He told me to hire a lawyer, and he was right about that too. I'm so sorry, girls. I know it's terrible for you too. Joan's voice softened, though it still carried a note of resolve. Mom, don't worry about us. We'll be fine. Dad's doing everything he can for us. You need to take care of yourself now. Hiring a lawyer is a good idea, and Jane and I can help where we can. Later that day, Camila heard the doorbell ring. She opened it to find a woman standing there, holding a folder. Delivery for Camila Tronder, the woman said, handing her the envelope before quickly walking back to her car. Camila returned to the kitchen, her hands trembling as she opened the folder. Her breath caught as her eyes landed on the title of the first document, Petition for Divorce. Max's words echoed in her mind, "Get a lawyer." As she sat at the kitchen table, staring at the papers, her gaze wandered across the familiar room. Memories of the happy times she had shared with Max filled her mind, each one now tainted by the knowledge that those days were gone forever. She knew she had no one to blame but herself. Years later, Camila found herself sitting at one of Joan's graduations at Duke. Across the room, her eyes fell on Max. He was tanned and looked fitter than ever, his broad smile lighting up the space around him. He was holding hands with a stunning woman, someone Joan had mentioned in passing, a fellow adventurer Max had met on one of his mountaineering trips. Camila couldn't help but remember the man she had once shared a life with, now transformed into someone new. She overheard him recounting stories to Joan's boyfriend about his recent travels. He even laughed about the infamous gold Mercedes. "It was such an unlucky car," Max said with a grin. "I ended up giving it back to a friend, and I think she sold it." As Max turned his attention back to his new life, Camila realized that while she had lost her chance at happiness with him, he had found a way to rebuild and thrive. She watched silently, a mixture of regret and reluctant admiration settling over her. Max had moved forward, and though the memories of their shared past lingered, he had created a brighter future, one she would only see from the sidelines.